Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we teach you all about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Tarrant.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. For more information on how to grow your business, go to our website at sparkpartners.com to learn about our masterclass and our new course called Unlock Growth. Please visit our website. How was your holiday, Adam?
Oh, it was great. Who can complain when you're in America?
Exactly. So I went down to visit my family, and my hometown is about 2 hours away. And on the way out of town, I had to fill up my Suburban, which is, of course, the big locomotive. It holds almost 30 gallons of gas, and it was easily over $100. At the pump, I think it was about $3.69 where I was filling up. And so it brings me to a topic which is unfamiliar to a lot of people, both the millennials today as well as the Gen Xers we've never really seen this idea of inflation. And I looked up a graph by the New York Times recently that showed that for the most part, the Gen Xers didn't see any inflation in their time. And of course, we've got this little uptick with respect to the past month or so. And so what is your take on inflation? Are we going into a mode of additional inflation? Is this a snowball effect? Or is it all just a bunch of ice?
Well, I think this ties back to the long-running discussion we have about trends versus fads. And in particular, what we take a look at are the length of time we can get a data series. And as I learned years ago, the longer the data series, the better off you are. And so let's take a look and think about what happened with inflation. You have to go all the way back into the 1970s to get that sort of terrible inflation where it was running just month after month, quarter after quarter, and lasted for about 3 to 4 years. That was a serious problem in the country. That was caused by a misunderstanding about money supply versus interest rates. It opened the door for a group of economists called the monetarists to come in, and it changed the way we approached the money supply and the use of the Federal Reserve under a chairman by the name of Paul Volcker. And that led to this very, very long period of having very little inflation, 2 to 3%. And actually 2 to 3% is a target. You want a little bit of inflation because it helps grease the wheels for economic growth. Deflation is horrible. Just any deflation at all, even 1% deflation creates unemployment, it creates business closures. It's a terrible thing. You never want deflation at all. And if you have a small amount of inflation, it helps insure against deflation. And that's the process that we've been in from the mid 1980s pretty much until now. Interest rates on mortgages peaked around 1983, 84 in there at around 18%, and they've been on the decline ever since until just recently they dropped all the way down to about 2%. And then we hit this quarter, right, where they said, well, inflation is the highest it's been in 30 years. And it really made me angry because it wasn't really true. That what they did was they took 1 quarter of data, 1 quarter, and they said, what are the prices in this 1 quarter versus the same quarter a year ago? So they weren't really tracking the prices, against, on a trend or on a series. They were looking at literally 1 data point. And they said, oh, inflation has gone to the stratospheric 7%, and now we have a horrible problem. Well, first of all, 7% is not stratospheric. 18, 19, 20% like we had in the 1970s and early 80s, that's stratospheric. Double-digit inflation robs everybody of their purchasing power, and it's a serious problem. And we see that often in developing countries. But 7% is not stratospheric. It is high. It is a bit problematic, but it is not stratospheric. Second, it was 1 data point. 1 data point. Now, it's important because you have to go back to what was happening that same quarter a year ago. And that same quarter a year ago, we were in the pandemic. We were facing deflation because businesses were closed, because people weren't traveling, right, because they weren't out buying anything. We were seeing that demand had fallen off the cliff. When the demand started to fall off, that's when you start to see this thing where you can get deflation. The Federal Reserve pumped in tons of money, and in doing so, they stopped us from getting into a deflationary cycle, which would have turned into something like the Great Depression with unemployment rates at 30, 40%. Instead, we put a little bit of money in place a year ago, and we kept ourselves from the deflationary cycle. Now, a year goes by, and we suddenly have higher prices. Oh me, oh my, are the pigs going to fly? I mean, for people to get excited about that 1 quarter really shell-shocked me. And the fact that the popular news media really made a deal out of it just told me they didn't really know, they didn't have anything else to talk about, number one. And number two, they didn't know what they were talking about. because that one quarter does not make a difference. We're comparing a quarter of growth at the end of the pandemic, at least at the end of this phase of the pandemic, with a quarter that was in the middle of a pandemic. So the circumstances were entirely different. If you take that same data and you do it in a 3-month roll, the 3-quarter rolling average, or you look at it across 3 years, you'll see that it smooths that all out. You'll see that what looked like inflation in one quarter, that data point just disappears into the rounding whenever you start to smooth the data by looking across multiple periods. And that's why we use longer trend series. So, I mean, I'm absolutely not worried about inflation at all. And, Larry Summers, who was he's an economist at Harvard University. He was at one time president of Harvard University. He's been the one economist that's gone on television making a big deal about inflation. And I have to be honest, Larry Summers will go on, say anything to get on television. He's been this way ever since he worked in the Clinton administration. He's a media prostitute. He'll do anything, again, say it second time, anything to get himself on television. He's not a noteworthy economist. His trend series are not the kinds of things that get followed by professionals. He's really much more of a politician than he is an economist. So people out there, if you're thinking you're going to head into inflation and you need to buy the stocks that are inflation tested or good inflationary times, and you're thinking you need to adjust the way you spend money or everything based on inflation, stop, because that's not going to be the future. We had a high quarter. We're going to have a couple more quarters. We'll probably see some inflation. There's a lot of issues right now, like, for example, you said with gasoline. Price of gasoline's gone up. Well, this is nothing different than, again, what we had in the 1970s. At that time, the U.S. wasn't producing enough oil to support ourselves. We got very, very reliant on Middle Eastern oil. And all you had to have happen was Saudi Arabia, which had so much oil per person in the country, shut off its taps or pull back its taps that they could control the price, because in the short term, demand was inelastic. So there's the demand, they reduce the supply, the price goes up. We're seeing the same thing happen now. Only this time, we got to the point just a few years ago where America made enough oil to supply itself. In fact, we were exporting oil. We had to change a law that had gone into place in the Carter administration, allowing us to export oil. We now we said, okay, we've got plenty of oil. But what happened? The price went to low numbers, right? We got down into the $20, in the 20s for oil, which is like adjusted for inflation, more like 10, right? It was very, very low price. And of course, when the demand slacked off during the pandemic, there was a very brief period where there was not enough storage for oil and people were paying to get rid of it. So that was then. Now what happens is, again, we get to this phase of the pandemic ending, demand comes roaring back, but we didn't drill any wells back when oil was $20 a barrel. The oil well efforts in the Permian Basin in Texas and Pennsylvania and North and South Dakota, all those sorts of things that had been really big 10, 12 years ago, they stopped. Everybody stopped. Nobody's making more. Nobody's producing additional oil. Nobody's doing things to the wells to get them to produce more. None of that activity is happening. And so Saudi Arabia and certain Middle Eastern countries can slow down their output, and the price goes up. How long will that last? Again, look at the long-term trend. We have hit peak oil demand. Demand for oil is going down worldwide. It is not going to go up. The only way you can talk about demand being up is to compare it again to a pandemic when we were all sitting at home and nobody was going anywhere. If you smooth that out, look past 2 years, start to do trend averages, and you'll see that the demand for oil is going down. So that means that the price of oil is going to continue to go back down. Now, can somebody in the short term affect price? Well, absolutely, because demand is somewhat inelastic. We can't all trade out our gasoline-powered cars for electric-powered cars. There aren't enough electric-powered cars to buy, and none of us have the money to go out and buy a new car. So in the short term, we have what we have. We need the oil. You can get the price to go up. But long term, again, don't go out and buy a new gasoline-powered car. That's the answer, because that's going to be an antique in 10 years. By 2030, it's going to be hard to buy gasoline-powered cars, brand new gasoline-powered cars, because all the manufacturers are converting to electric. So,
well, what's remarkable is I had a conversation with a kind of a mixed group the other day of millennials and a couple of Gen Xers and maybe a boomer or two as well. And we were discussing a bunch of things, and there's a fair amount of uncertainty. And I kind of chuckled and I said, you know what? The only thing constant is change. It's these things are happening. Yeah, the price of gas is up, These are all ripple effects of the pandemic, and I think as business executives, having an eye on the long-term ball is more important than if you happen to
Absolutely.
fumble a dribble or two.
Absolutely. I mean, the key here is you've got to be positioned in the right place next year and the year after that. You make short-term adjustments in order to deal with short-term exigencies, but you don't change your strategic plan. And you keep your eye on the trend. What's the long-term trend? Where are things headed? And what we know now is that we know that understanding inflation. Inflation is well understood. Money supply issues are well understood. We know how to control the money supply. We know what the impact is on interest rates. We had the Great Recession. The Great Recession caused an abnormally high number of bankruptcies. It caused real estate prices to short-term decline. But in most major markets, real estate prices came booming back. Between around 2012 to right up till very recently, and in some markets they're continuing to boom. So that whole problem, the Great Recession, where people thought, well, real estate prices were just going to go nowhere but down. Again, it was a short-term phenomenon, not a long-term trend. Long-term trend, if you've got more people in the greater population, you're going to need more housing. That's going to push prices up, right? So that was the long-term trend. The short-term phenomenon was the Great Recession. Now we've had the pandemic. That's caused short-term phenomena. You need to react to that, but you have to keep your eyes on the long-term trend, what's really happening out there. And that's where I think people need to go back again. What's happening with demographics in our country? People are getting older. The nation is aging. The country is getting more color. It's not, every year the white population is a smaller percentage of the total population. Keep your eye on these things because they have not changed, right? We haven't made any fundamental changes to our demographics, and therefore we anticipate getting back on those long-term trends next year.
It just takes a little bit of thinking, and it takes a little bit of humility to understand what's happening in the world. You'd get sideswiped by all these people on the right, on the left, that are almost blinded by the media and by what they hear in their circles. I talked about, we've talked about this in the past regarding China and Japan and other places that have a kind of a cliff issue in the future when their number of young people is, everybody's growing older, but there's no young people to infill, right? And so this big change in the breakdown of a company's age is going to have a significant issue on their manufacturing ability. It's going to have a significant issue in their ability to produce raw materials. And I said that to somebody the other day, and they just couldn't believe it. They were, angry about China this, China that, and I said, you know what? They're going to have some problems down the road in the next 25 years. And it's, we're living in a global economy, and people are scared about the Taiwan thing, and people that sort of take the fear that the media produces and they nurture it. And as business people, we got to be a little bit more stoic than that in the traditional sense. And
everybody should be cautioned to not be overly reactive to short-term items and things that appear in the media. All of us have to read our newsletters, and we have to read the newspapers to the extent they still exist. And we go to our news sources and we collect data. And that's why I always tell people it's very important to identify those things happening in the marketplace that affect your business and monitor those things. Monitor the trend lines, collect the data, draw the charts, and keep track of what's happening. Because as the technologies advance, it creates more opportunities, and it also creates change. And you mentioned this idea of change. Most of my work is built upon Clayton Christensen's identification of disruptive innovations, right? Where we talk about a step change improvement in something, usually due to innovation. I've extended that model to include step changes in your business due to regulatory change, such as deregulation is a change that can cause great opportunities, globalization. These things create a step change in the marketplace. And what we see happening is people looking short term and not thinking about when these step changes are going to occur and then be prepared for them. Let's take something like artificial intelligence. Well, let me back up. First of all, if you went back to the beginning of the industrial era, there was this song about John Henry and his hammer, and it was back in an era where when they were putting the railroads in place, they used to have people that would literally use a hammer to drive the stakes into the to hold the rails down, right? And so John Henry was one of these guys that went along. Somebody put the stake in, and he would drive it, stake into the hole, and he would drive it in. And then they invented a machine that could drive the stakes. And so there was the song's about the competition between John Henry and the machine, which one could drive the more stakes. And at the end of it, I think John Henry might win the short-term race, but he falls over dead. And so that is kind of like competing with the machine is a waste of time. And that was the industrial era, right? And what we saw over time were these large step change improvements in production. And it started with things like agrarian improvements in farm operations, and moved into factories and then robotics. And we keep seeing improvements in automation that improved our industrial output. It shifted into an information era around 1990, and it became dominant by the turn of the century in 2000. And now we're seeing artificial intelligence do the same thing that mechanization did back at the start of the industrial era. And so we're seeing, smarter machines. You can walk up to your front door, it knows who you are, and it unlocks itself, right? And it knows if it's not you, and it won't let somebody else get into the front door. Well, that's some kind of artificial intelligence. What we tend to do is we look at these individual small pieces and ignore them. We don't look at how they affect our business. And then one day we sort of wake up and say, oh my, things are radically different today. But then often we'll say they're radically different, but I didn't prepare for that. And so what we're trying to do with this podcast and with these materials and training classes we put out is help people understand, collect the data, make it part of your regular process. Instead of just collecting data on your current customers, your current products, your current sales, how things have been going in the businesses it's been, collect data on the marketplace. What's happening with demographics? What's happening with the population that you sell to? What's happening overall to the technology base that people are using? And then plot that. Plot how many people have 2 cell phones or whatever is important to your business. And it'll help you to look past these short-term things that occur, like a pandemic, like a new variant that comes out, a COVID variant that comes out. Helps you look past that because now you're tracking the data. And you can look at the trend long term, and you can look at how to smooth the data across these variations that happen, and look at what the real trend is.
What people don't understand, and this is the dirty secret in sales. So I've been doing sales essentially my professional career. And we talk with these companies, these executives who are maybe having some issues with sales, whether they're slowing down or flattening or even negative sales. And they always want to blame the sales manager. They always want to blame the sales structure. And they never want to blame the real culprit, which is their product or service. If you are making something that nobody wants to buy, you could have every salesperson in the world working on it, and they're not going to get anywhere. So this is the hard line, look in the mirror in your organization to see whether or not you're actually producing something that people want to buy. Well, how do you know what they want to buy? It ties back down to what we're talking about, which is trends, where are things going, taking these trends and doing trend clustering. We talk about that in a course, Think Innovation. And it really gives you those tools to be able to map out the direction of your product development team, and also be, build in this agility the way that Facebook does and Amazon does, in the ability to go and test out new opportunities.
Yeah.
We call that blank space teams. So what do you think, Adam? We're sitting here a month before the end of the year, before the new year. What should these folks be doing, these small, medium-sized business owners and entrepreneurs? What should they be doing right now to prepare for 2022?
Well, the first thing is, do you really know your value proposition? Because if you haven't figured that out and you're listening to our podcast, that's fundamental to everything. What's your real value proposition? Not what business do you run, not what are your products. What is your value proposition? Are you making people healthier? Are you making people smarter? Are you helping people be more mobile? Whatever your value proposition is, you've got to know that. And if you don't know that, then spend the rest of this year figuring that out so that you know the difference between your value proposition and your value delivery system. Because otherwise, you're just going to keep jumping through hoops to try to defend your value delivery system, meaning your products, your sales processes, your manufacturing processes, your sourcing processes. You're going to be jumping through hoops trying to protect that, trying to defend and extend that, when in fact you should be focused on your value proposition. So if you need help with that, I think people should jump onto the new course that we're putting out this week. It's all about how to protect, understand your desire to defend and extend your business, understand how you lock in to what you currently have. Get that done. Get your arms around that. The course is 3 hours, I think, something like that. You can do it at home, 3 to 5 hours. And I highly recommend, if you don't know your value proposition, look at how you defend and extend your existing business and break out the difference. Now, the second thing you want to do is you take a look at 2022 and say, what is the biggest trend that's going to affect our business in 5 years, right? Not in 1 year, in 5 years. And a lot of times people can identify the big threat, but they don't perceive it as happening today, so they don't want to do anything about it today. So the next big exercise is, what's the threat that's really going to come at you? Is it going to be high cost labor, low cost labor? Is it going to be regulations? What is it? A new technology? Is it a new material science? Is it a new way that customers behave? Is it a change in customer demand because of, let's say, people getting older, not needing what you need, what you sell? Changing tastes in the marketplace. What is the real threat? What's the big change in your business? And then think about how that creates new opportunities. So it's 3 steps. And you should have one done. You should know your value proposition. I would be bereft if I did not bring it up. Just make sure you got that. Then number 2 is take a look at what is the big trends that are going to affect you in 5 years, and start saying, how do I track that? What's the data I should be accumulating and tracking so that I can see how the threat is getting closer or the opportunities are starting to emerge?
Absolutely. We've talked about my startup as well, called Ciox. We have a device to help people breathe easier. Our value is that we help people breathe easier that have these lung diseases. And so we're aligned with our 5-year trends, which is demographics. People are getting older and want to live more active lives. Number 2 is remote patient monitoring and home treatments. These are all things that are aligning in the next 5 years that right now they're like little seedlings, right? Remote patient monitoring, there's little seedlings, and home treatments are seedlings compared to what they will be in 5 years. So we're aligned with that, and so I see a lot of companies out there that don't know their value proposition. They still don't know that. A lot of companies don't even care or don't even have the vision to see 5 years in the future. They're just surviving. I wouldn't even say that they're defending and extending. They're just trying to survive. And so if you want to get out of that rat race, if you want to get beyond that just survival into a thrive mentality, you've got to do these things like we're saying. We've got to really make an investment in yourself, in your business, in your team. And you just have to do that. If you want to go to the next level, you absolutely have to do that.
And I mean, there's a lot of trends that are going to affect people in business, and I recommend you write them down. 2 trends that are going to affect everybody, though, are demographics and artificial intelligence. AI over the next decade will be what mobility was in the year 2000, right? When we went from desktop computers and landline telephones to the world we have today. That started in 2000, now it is today. The same is going to be true about artificial intelligence. It will be embedded in everything. Now, let me give you an example. Today, if I want to drive from my home to the airport, I can have Google or Apple Maps. They'll tell me this is the distance and this is your estimated drive time. What would be even smarter and is coming is they'll say, don't leave now. If you need to be somewhere at a certain time, it might say, wait for the traffic to thin, and if you leave now, it's going to take 90 minutes. If you wait 15 minutes, it'll be 75 minutes. So you might as well wait 15 minutes because you're going to land there at the same time. And so that's taking data around what's happening with traffic patterns and getting smart. That's artificial intelligence applied to traffic patterns that start telling you things, not only selecting your route, but selecting your distance, your time to leave, those kinds of issues, That's just one. That's just one example of artificial intelligence being applied. I talked earlier about, does your doorbell know who you are? If we talk about facial recognition, a lot of people get upset. Why? Because issues of profiling have come up, and when we've profiled using facial recognition, it's had bad outcomes. but yet we can use facial recognition in many good ways. We already use it on an iPhone, for example, to lock and unlock your phone. You use facial recognition. We're going to be able to see that in many more applications. But it's not the facial recognition is the technology, it's the smartness that goes behind it that allows us to know what's happening. So, if you're a physician, patients could walk in the door and their record would automatically come up. Or even maybe if you're a car repairer shop, you could know who the customer is the minute they walk in the door. You could know if you are a retailer, someone who has a consistent repeat purchasing pattern, you'd know who they are when they walk in the door. These are just little examples of artificial intelligence, and they will apply to everyone. Demographics, AI. And then the last pieces you want to pick up, Joan, you want to make sure that you're understanding and applying mobile. You want to make sure that you're making your business asynchronous, that you don't have to be one-on-one in your interactions, and that you're taking advantage of the gig economy. Because the gig economy has been growing for the last decade. It's now a third of the entire economy. It will become 2/3 of the economy by the end of this decade. We're going to see, we already had the Great Resignation start, right? And the Great Resignation has people out there saying, I'm not going to work for someone else. I'm certainly not going to work for the old pay and benefits that I used to have. And they're changing the game. And a lot of that's going to lead to more use of the gig economy. And so you better be in front of that and taking advantage of it. Those are short-term, smaller trends that will feed into the two bigger ones.
Yeah, and this is actually a good segue to invite everybody. Last time I mentioned this to our listeners and viewers, I got some people asking for. We have a report called the Trend Report 2030. It's a list of 66 of the top trends that are involved today, taking us through the rest of the decade. And so, Adam hit the top, AI, mobility, asynchronous communication, asynchronous life. And of course, the demographics, we've added that to the big four as we've seen some significant action in that domain.
Now, is that available on the Spark Partners website, Manny, or do they need to ask for it through an email?
They will have to ask for it via email at manny@sparkpartners.com, MANNY, or adam@sparkpartners.com. And so, this report really gives you some really deep insights into what's available out there as far as these major trends. And there's other trends that happen all the time that are maybe more in your industry. But these are the top 66 global trends that are in action today.
Well, as we hit towards 2022, again, if you haven't taken a look at our Think Innovation course, I encourage everybody to do so. It is a comprehensive course that can help you lay out a strategic plan that can get you to 2030. I don't care how big you are, how small you are, you'll find the exercises, the 28 exercises you do in that program will help you to be much firmer in understanding your customers, much firmer in understanding your value proposition, and being prepared to be successful regardless of what comes at you. I don't care if it's a pandemic, or I don't care if it's a change in regulations or a change in politics, or anything. You will be much better prepared if you can just undertake that course. It's one of those things. You make an investment up front, and then you can go through the exercises, and you can repeat the exercises and make yourself current. And then anybody who's stuck, you need to get unstuck, and that's where our newest course comes in. And it's much less expensive, but it'll help you get unstuck and ready to go out and innovate. So as you're looking at December, and if you've got some time over the holidays, or you want to make sure that you start the year off planning for the future, these two programs are the best thing out there that anybody could get. And they build on the 25 years that we've been doing this kind of work with clients. And instead of having to hire somebody and pay them a consulting fee to come in and run workshops, they let you go through the exercises yourself, be self-paced, and try to get maximum benefit. And of course, Manny and I are here to help you if you ever get stuck with an exercise as you go through the program.
Very well said, Adam. Very well said. Well, with that, we'll be signing off, and keep an eye out for what's happening in your business for the next 5 years. Know your value proposition, and have a great rest of the year. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Manny.